Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I think from people coming from Germany, a conference like this, which shows us that Europe is bigger than Germany, maybe plus Poland and the Baltic states by now, which we have started to understand, but that there is more to do to overcome Yalta is just slowly coming into our awareness. And if I tell you that we are just starting to understand that in Germany, how long will it take that people living in Portugal, Spain, who are more orientated toward the south, will have to learn about the European map, which is a lot different from 1990, where many of the countries, which are now sitting at the table here, representing sovereign states, were under the roof of the Soviet Union. And this is one of the parts of history we still, or again, have to talk about, because I think we have not finished that story yet. If you talk about Ukraine, I think you have two words. One is surprise and one is shock. They both determine pretty well what has happened. If I remember a year ago, where in Germany, when you watch TV and all the politicians visiting Maidan, it was almost like a festival. And nobody was awaiting that this might end up in a real war. So we have really been not prepared. I think if we now look back, we can say we could have known a little better if we hadn't put a big taboo about Georgia. Because Georgia 2008 already showed us that the Russian Federation and Kremlin is willing to not openly annex, but actually in the fact annex parts of the country as a revenge for a country that decides to turn west and towards Europe. And the excuses which we love to bring, that Mr. Saakashvili was silly enough to provoke the Russians, which he definitely did, I guess, still is not an excuse for dividing a country. Our response on Georgia was not firm. There was treaty being signed by Putin himself, and they were not put into reality, and nobody talked about it anymore. And something like that, I guess, looking back now, is an invitation that Kremlin could expect that, okay, we negotiate, we sign papers, but then we turn around, and maybe Europe even is happy if it doesn't have to look at a reality that treaties have not come into reality and that the Russian side has not delivered. So the annexation of Crimea was really unexpected. But again, already there was this waving illusion in the back. We hope that this was enough for him. And if you looked at German TV, you could learn, well, if we are honest, wasn't Crimea Russian all the time? It never really has belonged to Ukraine. And so, again, we were building up illusions because we did not want to really face the fact. And this now is matching with what we learn, the hybrid warfare. I think Putin has learned also there never will be annexation anymore, because that's too clearly and too openly going against international law. Everything below, though, which is destabilization, which is bringing in arms, which bringing in soldiers on vacation, which means economic pressure and propaganda, in the Western countries, which is almost the most important, about the fascist Maidan, the anti-Semites on Maidan, the Ukrainian army now shooting at its own population in Donetsk and Lugansk. All this propaganda is, I think, at the moment the biggest weapon which is being used in Western countries, especially in Germany, and it is a weapon. But since seemingly Germany does not know anything about war anymore, we do not understand when weapons like that are being used. So you have this Germany, this complicated and difficult Germany, that due to different reasons does not want to come into conflict with Russia. It is because of historical guilt, and there is little knowledge that our historical crimes, which we are to be held responsible for against the Soviet Union, today don't mean only Russia, but today mean Belarus, especially Ukraine, the Baltic countries, and the propaganda, though, on the other side, is still using this matching words of Soviet Union and Russia and using it very successfully in Germany. So we are not aware that our history and our historical responsibility is towards Ukraine just as much as towards Russia. So then you have, of course, economical interests. We have been talking about that. You have fear about a war. And there is many families in Germany, in our historical DNA, they still remember that war with Russia is really very, very terrible, and that there is a lot of victims then. And this is, I think, is the most touchy thing to talk about. There is long lines of history that Germany and Russia, Berlin and Moscow have come to good terms in history, even deciding over the countries in between. And there is too little awareness about that. And even if you would go into German school classes and ask them what has happened the 1st of September, I think they would know that Germany went over the borders into Poland. If you would ask them what happened the 17th of September, German students would not know, because accepting our responsibility, our guilt about German fascism made us not talk about Stalinism anymore, because we did not want to relativate German crimes by saying, but Stalin was just as bad, which we can't and shouldn't do. But so you have a big many different lines, and I think and I fear that Russian propaganda and those sitting in Kremlin and creating the propaganda are knowing more about us Germans than we do. Now, why is that so important? Because it explains that Germany is shaking back and forth. And if you listen to our foreign minister, who is again and again talking about the conflict partners, which should come back to the table, it creates an equidistance, wishing that we shall not be too clear that there has been an aggression, a clear aggression coming from the Kremlin. And Kremlin is using that. So we do have the Chancellor on one side, who has been very outspoken. We have a foreign ministry that is again and again talking about the conflict partners that should come back to a dialogue. And then we have one sentence in Germany which is very important and used all the time: there is no military solution. But there is a military solution on the ground every day. Another sentence like that is, we should do everything to keep up the ceasefire. But there is no ceasefire. There has been fighting on the ground all the time. So what is happening in Germany, it is a big fight about German minds. This is what it is all about. And this creates such a difficult Germany, although it is such an important player within EU, it creates it being such a difficult player. What we have, so all the ideas of why couldn't you Ukrainians become a buffer state? Why do you have to enter EU? You know, we have a fatigue in the first place, but can't you live pretty well in neighbor with Russia? Why can't you? So all those ideas are being offered in the public. There is even a debate whether EU, with the EU Association Treaty, shouldn't have asked Moscow beforehand. We could have known that all this trouble would come about if we just had asked the Kremlin. And it was a provocation to tear them over to our side. What should Russia do? So you have this mixed up mind, and you have little understanding that all what is happening now is not only about Ukraine, but that it is about the European Union, and I think it is about the transatlantic alliance also. The fact that we have seen UKIP, FPÖ, Jobbik, Le Pen, all of the right-wing and right populist parties taking part in the so-called referendum on Crimea, not OSCE, showed that there is a link between Kremlin and the right-wing parties. What do the right-wing parties want in the EU? They want to destroy EU. So there is a link, which is not by chance, but which has a lot of reason. And on the other side, you have the German left and the European left that does not want the transatlantic connection either, because they are anti-capitalistic. So what we have now on German streets is so-called peace demonstrations, and you have the left wing who are against NATO and against capitalism. You have the right wing who are against a multicultural, multinational Europe. You have those who still have connections to Russia and still think they are defending Russia against the Cold War, which has been opened from the West. You have all this anti-Western parts, and this is a mixture which is hard to digest and which is not really well analyzed in our heads yet. We are at the very beginning. So when Putin says this is Western values, all those homosexuals and the women wanting to emancipation and so on, he's offering something for this mixture in Europe, and he is offering something for those who do not want the transatlantic alliance, but who want to come back due to different reasons to the continent in itself, and from the German perspective, this angle, Berlin, Moscow. So to come to a conclusion, the fight which you are fighting is ours, because it is about rule of law, freedom, it is about international law, it is about human rights not being Western ideas but universal ideas, which includes, for example, freedom for homosexuals. And this is why we should understand that staying firm is not only about the future of Ukraine, but it is really about the future of us. Thank you.